Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and I'm joined with Sako Gekchian, and I am super excited because we are continuing our series going through the Bhagavad Gita together. Um, and I've said it before, but for those of you who don't know, the Bhagavad Gita is like the principal text of the Hindu religion. It's what when at least in my country where I live, Sako is fortunate to live in Armenia, but where I live, some of our Congress people and some of our um, people who work in like the current president's administration, a lot of them are Hindus, and when they swear into office, they swear on the Bhagavad Gita. So we've been going through this, and basically we're taking the approach of um, the things that we can appreciate about it. We're exalting these things, talking up these things, and the points where we disagree, we want to respectfully dialogue with our Hindu friends about these things. And obviously, we're Christians, so our goal is that everybody watching will become Christian or listening will become Christians. But, we want to hear back from you. So, if you're watching or listening and you're like, "Hey, I don't agree with these guys. I don't agree with their conclusions. We want to hear from you. Tell us why. We want to engage with what you have to say." So,
Yeah,
last time we did a show together, we kind of ended on this note of the of the Bhagavad Gita talking about sacrifice and sacrifices to the devas, and we were talking about like why are these sacrifices necessary? And so, Sako, did you want to start out with just kind of going through, continuing with that discussion and kind of
right.
exploring? Because Sako has been a busy bee since we last talked. He has been researching this topic about what exactly is the reason for sacrifice within Hinduism. So, Sako, why don't you take that away and let us know what's going on here? Why are there sacrifices from within the Hindu worldview? And we'll talk about it. Are you there? Okay, Sako seems to be frozen. I don't know what's going on with that. So I will take a look at the research that he sent over. So, Sako sent me this. It says that in the no, let me see what happened here. It says that in the Vedic literature, which is the earliest Hindu literature, the devas or gods are described as celestial beings who depend upon yanja, sacrifice, for their sustenance and continued power. If they do not receive sacrifices, they lose strength, vitality, and even their sovereignty over the cosmos. There's my guy. There he is.
There it is. Yeah,
Um, this cosmological mechanism is fundamental to the Vedic worldview, where human ritual action sustains the cosmic order. So, first in the Rig Veda, we see in Rig Veda 164:50, it says, "The gods attained to godhead by sacrifice." So they didn't start out as gods, they got there by sacrifice.
yeah.
Um,
And it kind of depends on who you ask. Like
okay.
there's a few like so many like cosmological stories. There's like a few different versions of events.
Right. Um, and Sako's gonna walk us through some of that in a minute here, but also, um, Satapatha Brahmana says, the way I said that was kind of weird. Says the gods being mortals before became immortal through sacrifice. So without sacrifice, divas lose their immortality and are vulnerable to the auras or demons. The text even recounts instances where these auras gained ascendancy because sacrifices were neglected or misdirected. Um, so really quick, Sako, do the demons need sacrifices?
No, not. I mean, not that I was able to find.
So the demons are kind of, in some ways, the demons are actually kind of more powerful than the gods.
Yeah, I mean, let me check actually. You know what? Is it's worth looking up real quick
Okay,
because we don't want to misrepresent
of
anything. So
course, of course. So go ahead and look that up for a second, and I'll keep going with this thing. Um, okay, without Tai Taittiriya Samhita says, without yanja or sacrifice, the gods do not thrive and their power dwindles. They do not thrive and their power dwindles. And then there's a whole bunch of academic literature that he sent over to support what we're talking about. But basically, the conclusion is that the Vedic literature firmly upholds the idea that devas are nourished and empowered by yanja, or sacrifice. If humans stop offering sacrifices, devas lose their vitality. They risk defeat and the cosmic order collapses. This dynamic is central to the Vedic understanding of the human divine covenant as a symbiotic relationship where ritual sacrifice sustains divinity. So compare that with um Christianity, where like Psalm chapter 49 verse 12 says, "If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine." And basically, what God is getting at is this is one of the Psalms of Asaph, and it says, "The mighty one of God, the Lord speaks and summons the earth. From the rising of the sun to its setting, out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes, he does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire, around him is a mighty tempest. He calls to the heavens above and to the earth that he may judge his people. Gather to me, O faithful ones, who made the covenant with me by sacrifice." So we also, the Hebrew peoples had a concept of sacrifice, but why? The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is the judge. "Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against you." Uh-oh, why is he testifying against them? "I am God your God, not for sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me, but I will not accept a bull from your house or a goat from your folds, for every beast of the forest is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. I know the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls, or do I drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and perform your vows to the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. So the reason I'm sharing that is because in Psalm 49 or Psalm 50 in the Hebrew Bible, what we see happening is that God does not need our sacrifices. The reason God gave the Israelites the covenant of sacrifice is um, so that they could come to know him and relate to him and live in union with him. It was for relationship to him. It was not for them to be It was not because God needed this from them. It was actually for their benefit. In the same way, Christians have the Eucharist. In the Eucharist,
Mhm.
God is the one who offers himself, and we receive him. So there is no lamb, there is no there's no animal being sacrificed. Instead, God offers himself to us, and then we offer that back up to him, and we are united to him through this meal, this communal meal. And that's what the Christian concept of sacrifice is
Yeah.
this idea of a welcoming gift, something that we bring to God and He blesses and unites Himself to us. It's for our benefit, not for God's benefit. Um,
Uh,
okay,
on
so
that note,
Sako's
on that note,
back.
yeah. On that note, I sent you what I was able to find on that question.
Perfect. So regarding my question, in Vedic literature, the auras, often translated as demons, are not usually described as
Oh,
needing sacrifice.
it's a Ashuras. The S that has a sh sound.
Oh, Ashura. Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you. So the
Mhm.
Asuras, often translated as demons, are not usually described as needing sacrifice in the same ontological or cosmological sense as the Devas. However, some complex and evolving relationships between sacrifice and Asuras do emerge. Early Vedic texts depict the Asuras as rivals of the Devas who coveted sacrificial offerings but were denied them by the righteous performance of Yajna. In some later Brahmana texts, Asuras are shown attempting to gain power through sacrifice but in vain by erroneous means. In post Vedic and Puranic reinterpretations, the Ashuras misuse sacrifice or oppose the Yajna tradition. While devas are nourished and sustained by Yajna, the Ashuras are often portrayed as seeking sacrifice for selfish or disruptive ends, but not for maintaining cosmic order. So, like, they don't need sacrifice. So
They,
my so my
so it's almost
challenge
like,
still stands then.
yeah, it does. And yeah, so it's like they need it in the same way the gods need it, I guess. So like theoretically, if they got enough sacrifices, they would sort of then ascend to godhood and like take the place of the devas.
Okay. And if
Yeah,
the devas don't get sacrifices, then they'll basically just
they
become
diminish and
demons.
they lose. So yeah, so so this sort of sets up something that me and Kevin wanted to articulate, which is as we mentioned, we might have mentioned in a previous thing, Judaism and Christianity in their original forms are not monotheistic. If monotheism is the belief that only one divine being exists,
Right.
Christianity and its ancestor, ancient Israelite religion, is not monotheistic.
Right. It's technically henotheistic.
Yeah, or some people have used the term monolatry.
Right.
Um, so essentially, we believe that there is like a council of gods, you could say. The Hebrew word is Elohim,
Right.
but there's only one Elohim that is ontologically unique and special
Right.
because he,
All of the Elohim are gods, but only one God is Yahweh.
yeah. So all yeah, and Yahweh is basically, for our Hindu listeners, is basically in the role of Bhagavan in the in our understanding, in our cosmology. He is the supreme Lord. He is the ground of all existence. All things have their being in him. He is not. He is supremely simple. He is not contingent on other things. He does not have parts. Uh, so similar to similar to the more personal understandings of Brahman in Hindu schools. But, and this is this is where our critique of Hindu cosmology comes into play. Um, why sacrifice to beings like the devas? Why sacrifice to them, or why even worship beings that require your food offerings to sustain the cosmic order?
Right.
Especially when there is a most high God with a capital G, what depending on what you are, Vaishnava or Shaiva or Shakta, like there's a supreme being who effortlessly sustains the cosmic order all on their own.
Right.
So like the role of the devas almost becomes a bit redundant at that point.
Exactly.
Uh,
And
like
here's the craziest part too, is we as Christian, well, you're probably about to make this point, so I'm sorry, I'm
no
jumping
worries.
ahead of you, but I'm just so excited. We actually have, the divine council, and the New Testament reveals um that now, because of the work of Christ, human beings are even on the divine council, which we can talk about more in a little bit. But at the very least, even in the Old Testament, angels are on the divine council, and they're the ones that are being called gods, with a lowercase g. And
Yeah,
yet, even these beings don't need sacrifice.
no,
Humans that have been elevated to the divine council don't require sacrifice. Um, Neither do angels. They're not requiring of sacrifice. They do the will of God and the work of God without the need of sacrifice.
right. And so, my little bit of a metaphysical challenge to the Hindu cosmological assumptions is the assumption that spiritual beings are prone to entropy in the same way that material beings are. I can understand where somebody might have, where like people in the past might have sort of looked at humans and how like, oh, we get tired, we run out of energy, so we need to eat to sustain ourselves, otherwise we lose our strength and stuff, and then sort of applied that to spiritual beings, that hey, if that's our experience, then something like that experience must be true for spiritual entities. But I would, push back on that, like why make that assumption?
Right,
um Especially if we're talking like, if we're talking about non-material bodies. And for to clarify for our listeners, when we say body, we're using the word body in the sort of ancient Greek sense. A body is sort of a nexus of powers and abilities. Um, so angels or gods also have bodies. They're just not the same as our bodies. They're, you know, they're, you could say, of a higher quality, of
right.
more durable stuff. Um,
Well, and when we sort of, in a sense, when we're using body here, um, like to describe an angel, part of the reason we say that angels have bodies is because they're not omnipresent. So angels are confined to a particular.
right.
They
There,
can't be in two places at once, basically,
yeah.
as mysterious as angels are.
Right. There's a place where Michael ends and Gabriel begins.
Exactly.
We don't know where that is. That's why, like, two of the Orthodox priests that we both listen to have, on their podcast, call angels VCIs, vast cosmic intelligences.
Right.
So um yeah, so they're massively powerful beings, but they're circumscribed. They're limited. Um but yeah, as we pointed out, even they don't require sacrifices because their bodies are such that they don't get tired. They don't. run out of strength if they're not sustained. They don't need to be sustained. They're already sustained in their existence by God.
Right.
So so I would sort of so yeah, that's sort of my first point of criticism in the video is questioning the assumption that spiritual beings are subject to the same laws of entropy that we are. And the reason and this is applicable to, my critique of Vedic sacrifice, our critique of Vedic sacrifice, but it extends to another sector, another sort of a point of disagreement that we have, which
Right.
is reincarnation. Because in order for reincarnation to be a thing, you need entropy to exist in the spiritual world.
Yes.
You need devas to sort of wither and die after a certain point so that they can then start over again on the wheel of samsara. So so yeah, like it's something to think about as we go through these next pages and stuff in the Gita is why the question, why assume that just because things sort of fall apart or disintegrate or you know go into disorder or loss of energy in the material sphere of reality, why assume that that is by necessity true for spirits?
Right. Exactly. So, so did you want to go through the talking about reincarnation now, or did you want to dive into the Gita and kind of get into it via the Gita?
Let's get into it via the Gita because I think we've more or less sort of addressed the reincarnation question. Because we even addressed it in our. Oh,
Oh, I'm just doing share screen so that
oh, okay, okay.
people have
I
the
got this.
so that people
Yeah,
can see what we're so that they can
right,
see the Gita when we read it
right. Yeah.
if they're watching.
Yeah. I think we sort of did also address the reincarnation question when we did our video on the soul.
Yeah,
Um,
we did talk about that.
yeah. So, but I'll sort of revisit it if it comes up.
Okay. I've done two talks on reincarnation before. I have
Yeah.
one on I think it's called uh if I remember right, it's on YouTube under the transmigration of the soul. And then I have another one that is the what's his name? Father Seraphim Rose. His treatment of the transmigration of the soul. So I've gone through both of those in the past if you want to see more about that. And we might talk about it here too. So let's let's make this bigger. Let's embiggen, as my wife would say. Let's
In Vegas.
embiggen it. Um, all right. Um, so we're on. I think we're in chapter 3. I can't remember now, but we're on page 41. Let me just make sure what chapter we're on here. Yes, we are on chapter 3. We are in chapter 3, verse 13. So it says, "The righteous who eat the remnants of sacrifice are freed from all sins, but the sinful ones who cook only for their own sake eat only sin." And then the Ramanuja commentary says on this verse, those who acquire articles of food solely for propitiating the Supreme Being, abiding as the self of Indra and all other devas, and who cook and offer them to the Supreme Being, and then sustain themselves on the remnants of such offerings, they alone will be free of all mental impurities which have resulted from beginningless karma and which obstruct the direct vision of the Atman. But the evil-minded ones appropriate for personal use the things which the Supreme Being has granted them for devotional service, and use it all for self-gratification alone. They verily eat only sin, for the error here referred to is the accruing of negative result of the actions. Sri Krishna again points out that everything has its origin in sacrifice. According to both the worldly and the scriptural view, the performance of sacrifice is therefore necessary, and their non-performance is a failing. um, as a total aside, every time it says Sri Krishna in this, it makes me think of there's this really awesome Thai restaurant in the town that I live called Sri Thai. And every time I read Sri, I'm like, oh man, I want to go get some really good curry. Um,
Oh
that's
man,
neither
don't.
here nor there.
Oh, Kevin, man, don't do the American thing.
I gotta get me some curry.
Some curry.
Anyway,
Hey, I gotta get me some curry and go hunt me some furries.
yes, exactly. Curry and then a Big Mac on the way home, right? Like that's the American way. Okay, no.
Okay. Yeah.
But no, this is interesting. So I can actually see how like I'm gonna be charitable here, even though I
Mhm.
disagree with what they're saying for obvious reasons, because my worldview doesn't contain this idea of sacrifice that we've been talking about.
Mhm.
But I'm going to be charitable and say that what we just read in verse 13 and in the commentary would be the logical conclusion that I would draw if I believed what they believe about sacrifice. So what I'm
Right.
saying is that like if I believed that my sacrifices were necessary for the gods in order for them to sustain the world and keep righteousness in order, then I would think it was pretty messed up if I just ate all my food and didn't give anything as a sacrifice. Like I'd be pissed off if I saw some guy not giving anything as a sacrifice and I'm like, dude, come on, man. Like, don't you know we need to uphold the cosmos here? Um, like so, it's easy. I guess I'm saying that because I think it's easy for some people to jump straight to like, well, I don't believe in sacrifice, so therefore everything you say about it is stupid to me. But I don't think that approach is righteous. I think it's better for us to acknowledge that, like, on a good note, you guys are being logically consistent. You guys are, I see where you guys are coming from for the reasons that I have already stated. I don't
Am I back?
follow it.
Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Occasionally it cuts off. Yeah. So I was saying, I think what it's trying to say is that like so the thing with Krishna, obviously is that the Gita is clear that he does not require sacrifice because he's God with a capital G. So, but I think
He's
it's
the
saying like
OG.
yes, exactly. So I think it's saying that like that by sort of sacrificing to the devas, you're sort of indirectly sacrificing to Krishna, and it is accounted for you as merit. You could say, like to use a little bit of a biblical thing, like but yeah, so it's sort of like indirectly the offering goes to the supreme being who is the self of all those other of all those devas.
Right. Okay. And again, we would just like,
Yeah.
I said something nice, so now I'll say something mean. No, I'm just kidding. It's not mean. It's just I'm just
Right.
disagreeing is that like again, we would just say that from our perspective, God does not, and even the sort of lowercase g gods don't require sacrifice. So, from our perspective, like if God doesn't need sacrifice, then he doesn't need sacrifice. There is no like I'm gonna do this for um although what I will say is that okay, I'm gonna be charitable again and I'm gonna try to find common ground a little bit and then maybe Sako will tell me that I'm on the right track or maybe he'll tell me that
Uh-huh.
um maybe I'm being too nice here and I'm seeing what I want to see.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like there is actually a sense in which there is a point of contact, maybe, because even though we disagree with the idea that God requires sacrifice, or even that God's ministers require sacrifice, I think there is a sense in which maybe we can agree with the idea that like we have a concept within Christianity that like Sako is in the image of God, so if I do something kind for Sako, then I am doing something kind towards God. If I do
Yeah.
something, if I am venerating, not worshiping, but venerating a saint or an angel or something like that, then there is a very real sense in which the service that I offer to, or even a person like, like maybe a priest or something, even the service that I offer to this person who is holy and is in, who loves God and who is loved by God, that service sort of passes to God. Like God receives that as if it was given directly to him,
Yeah.
because this person bears his image. And this is one of the reasons why Jesus tells us to be kind to our enemies, because even our enemies still bear the image of God. And so there's this
Yeah.
sense in which when I'm kind to people who hate me, then the kindness I give them is actually sort of an act of love towards God.
It's almost like uh you could almost say like on a deeper spiritual level by choosing to love your enemies, you're seeing them not as you see them, but as God sees them. You're sort of letting your prejudices go off to the side,
Right,
putting them away, and sort of looking like looking through them, uh, looking at them through God's eyes, who is not God, who is impassible, who doesn't have favorites. He's not prejudiced.
right,
Um, and there's also another sense of sacrifice where Saint Paul mentions like in your sort of daily walk in your Christian life, you sort of offer your body and to some degree your actions as a living sacrifice.
that's right, absolutely. All right. So now verse 14. Sorry. From food arise all beings. From rain food is produced. From sacrifice comes rain, and sacrifice is achieved through activity. And Ramanuja says all beings have their existence in nourishment. From rain, food is produced. These two facts are matters of common experience. From sacrifice comes rain. This is known from such scriptural passages as The oblations offered in fire reach the sun, and from the sun comes the rain. Manu 376. And sacrifice consists of activities such as the collecting of materials and similar actions by the sacrificer. Um, I am going to just head something off at the pass, which is I realize that there will be a temptation in some of my listeners who are coming from a Western mindset to be like, oh, ha ha ha, this is dumb. They think that sacrifices produce rain and that stupid clouds produce rain or whatever. Yeah, ancient people weren't actually stupid like you think they are. So ancient people didn't like think that they weren't dumb. They weren't sitting there like, "Duh, where does rain come from?" Like they knew that rain came from the clouds. They weren't idiots. But their belief is actually more complex than that. They believed that through sacrifices they are empowering the gods who then reward them by sustaining the natural order and giving them rain. Um
Right.
Whereas we don't believe that, but I'm saying that, I'm saying this not to defend what I believe is false, but I'm saying this to defend the concept that when we attack a belief, we need to be very careful to accurately represent that belief. So,
Yeah. And
so
there,
if, yeah, go ahead, Sako.
oh, I was gonna say, and uh, even even though we reject the notion of sacrifice, there is a little grain of truth here because, and this is sort of gonna, a lot of our Western Christian brothers and sisters don't know this, but there are angels that are guardians over natural elements
That's
and parts
right.
of nature. There is an angel of fire. There's an angel of the waters. There's an
That's
angel
right.
of the storms and the winds. Uh, Now, again, they don't require sacrifices to do their duty. That God has
Right.
already empowered them to carry out their duties in helping sort of maintain the natural order. And again, God doesn't even need angels to do this. He just does it because he likes it. He likes to involve his
Right. He loves
children.
to give his creatures the participation in his work.
Exactly. So just out of his pure pleasure, he delegates.
That's right.
And so again,
Because, I mean, otherwise he wouldn't have needed, like, he doesn't need to have created anything. Like, if you stop and think about it, God didn't need to create the universe. He was perfectly content even without creation. There doesn't need to be creation. God gains nothing from creation. He has all that he could ever desire just within himself, just in the union of the Trinity is perfect life and but it's the outflow of that trinitarian love that he creates the universe to pour out his love upon it. And part of that is giving creatures tasks to live out his image, to live out his glory on the earth. So that's why
right.
there's an angel of the waters.
So I kind of cut out there for a second again, but so forgive me if I'm repeating anything you might have said, but yeah, this also sort of goes back to what I said. Biblical cosmology is not monotheistic.
That's right. Yeah.
So if you like, and I know this is gonna trigger some people, yes, there is a god of the waters and a god of the storms.
Hmm.
Ish.
Ish, right. It's lowercase g. It's lowercase g, and it's,
Yeah.
um, it
Although
might
to
be
be
more.
fair, even the gods of the pagans are lowercase g gods. So
Right. Okay, that's true. Yeah, well, actually, that's a good point. And well, I think we're going to talk about this more in a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's interesting to me that um liberal theologians got so excited when Karen Armstrong proved that basically all of like the most ancient, if you go back all the way to the very most ancient part of various religions, what you get is a very consistent picture where there's a most high God, and then this most high God either is so distant that he doesn't really matter, like Aristotle's unmoved mover, or he gets sort of castrated and sent out, or he gets just the religion develops to kind of exclude him. And she made the point that the only religion that's different in this is actually the Israelite religion that eventually became Christianity. And the reason why it's different is basically because in the Israelite religion, instead of the Most High God eventually getting shuffled off, that Most High God is seen as the only God worthy of worship and is actually becomes very the relationship between him and his people becomes very exclusive. But what what I find funny about that is that Karen Armstrong proved our point that that
Yeah.
this is she didn't disprove Christianity, she proved what the Christian Bible says, which is that
Right.
all of the gods are real. It's just that their perspective, the Christian Bible never says all of the mythologies of all the other nations are totally false and stupid. No, what the Bible does is very intelligently takes the mythologies of other peoples and sort of turns it around. So Isaiah
Deconstructs it or
deconstructs it.
demythologizes.
Yeah, deconstructs it is a good word for it. Isaiah does this brilliantly when he talks about you were in the garden, and then he starts talking about the fall of man, but he's talking about it in terms of a cosmic rebellion in which this deceiver, this false spirit angel was this fallen angel actually rose up against God, but he uses the language of the Babylonian Baal cycle. And basically, he's casting Satan in the character of Baal and saying, you did do this. You did rise up against the Most High God, just like you tell your people you did. But how did that go for you? You got cast down. You got defeated.
Right.
You got owned, son. Um, it was like LeBron James trying to play Michael Jordan. You got owned. Um, no, but
Yeah.
it
So
was so it's yeah, and I mean Isaiah does kind of mock Baal, so I'll give you that. But my point is that like the whole point of the Bible and the whole point of Christianity is not for us to just say like we we know what is true and everybody else is just a moron. The point is actually that all these ancient religions, all of these ancient ideas, these all actually are pointing to something that is fulfilled in Christ. And that's ultimately what we're saying to our Hindu listeners is not you guys are dumb, but actually we think you guys are really smart. And it's just that the only thing you're lacking is Christ. And so we want to point you to where you can have him and complete what you have by having a relationship with him. And then you can put away all of the gods who need sacrifices in order to because because all of these beings, you can cut out the middleman and go straight to the one true God. Okay.
no, okay, I'm back. I'm back.
Perfect. You're,
Ugh,
I'm
crappy,
back.
crappy ass Soviet infrastructure, man. Ugh.
Uh-oh.
I like my hatred for communism meter is actively like growing as we speak.
That's awesome.
Like I didn't think it was possible for me to hate communism any more than I already do, but
But it's growing. It's growing. It's festering inside you as we. Okay. Um,
anyway, so
we're
I was
on
gonna say
verse
like
50. No, you're good. You're good. I'll
to
take any opportunity to bash communism, no lie. Uh
anyway, but yeah, to your point, what you were talking about, the whole like sort of erosion of the Most High God is. I'm gonna say this quick before in case I get cut off again.
yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
Um, you kind of see this in Hindu cosmology because um for a lot of people, unless you sort of read the literature, you don't know. But Indra, in the early layers of the Vedas, Indra is like is sort of like a Zeus figure because he's never seen as God with the capital G. Um, the Purusha, or sort of the cosmic person, is plays that role in the earliest Vedic literature, but Indra is sort of the most high deva, so kind of like Zeus on Mount Olympus. And you see um, all this. Oh, okay, good. I'm still here. You
Yeah,
see
you're
all
here.
this.
I'm just transfixed by what you're saying.
No worries. All these hymns, uh, specifically written in his honor, and you have all these sacrificial formulas and yagnas and all these things for him. But in later Vedic literature, as you get to the Upanishads, you start to see this um, in the Briharanya Upanishad. So it's 3 a.m. and I'm kind of tired with my pronunciation. But you see this in you starting the Upanishads, and then you get to the Puranic literature, you get to the epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And Indra is really demoted. Like he used to be this thundering warrior god, and he still has his moments in the literature, like in battles against the Asuras and stuff. But he's almost made into a comic relief character. Like like uh like he gets there's all kinds of stories about how he uh how he sort of rises up to fight the demons, but then he gets his butt whooped and is like cowering behind a corner, and then like either God with a capital G sort of comes in, whether it's Shiva or Vishnu, depending on the tradition, and he sort of like fixes everything, or sometimes even a human sage does better than Indra
Oh no.
in some of the literature, and human sages are able to curse devas. Um, like there's a famous legend about how Indra basically became infatuated with the wife of a rishi, a sage, and so he took the form of her husband in order to go and lie with her. And when the husband came home to his hut or his cottage, he saw Indra in the middle of the conjugal act with his wife in his form. But because he's an enlightened rishi,
Hmm.
he was able to sort of see through the disguise. So he quickly figured out that this was Indra, and he cursed him uh, for as a punishment for the specific act that he did, like because he let his obsession with vagina cloud his judgment such that he did this adulterous act. He was cursed to have 1,000 vaginas on his body. and then
Uh,
Vishnu, who is God with the capital G, is mildly amused by this, but has a little bit of pity on him. So he turns the vaginas into eyes, and he sort of and he sort of laughs and says, "There, now you can see all around." but but
Ah,
but all of this to say that like Indra, the big thundering big guy, like essentially like a cross between Thor and Odin in the Vedic literature, is gradually demoted to a comic relief character in subsequent literature. So I think even in Hindu literature, you sort of see what Karen
yeah,
Armstrong is talking about.
absolutely. He basically goes from being like our Saint George to being like George Costanza.
Oh, man. Okay, okay, we can let's keep reading.
You're like, I don't know what to do with that. Okay. Um, I am chocked full of pop culture references
you
to
you know
throw
what?
out.
Yeah, you know what? That that deserves this. Hold on. Okay, there it is.
That's amazing. All right, verse
Okay, okay.
15. Know that activity springs from Brahman, and Brahman arises from the imperishable self. Therefore, the all pervading Brahman is ever established by sacrifice. The
See
commentary.
that?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
go
let's see
ahead.
what Ramanuja has to say because that's kind of confusing. Like, how does that work? Because Brahman is the absolute supreme self, like God with the capital G. He doesn't
Right.
emerge out of anything.
Okay, so this is interesting. So the commentary says activity arises from Brahman. Brahman here refers to the natural physical body born of Prak Prakrti and consisting of modifications of Prakrti. The Brahman here denotes Prakrti as the scriptural text. From him arises this Brahman, and this Brahman becomes name, form, and food. Mun up 119. In the Gita, it is also taught by Sri Krishna that this great Brahman is my womb, 14.3. Therefore, the phrase activity. I thought Krishna was a dude.
Well, womb in a symbolic sense, like kind of like how God in the Bible describes himself as like giving birth to Israel.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it means it in that sense.
This great Brahmin is my womb, 14.3. Well, I never know. I mean, you're talking about dudes growing
Yeah.
vaginas all over themselves, so
Well,
like I've gotta, I've gotta keep up. I've gotta keep up.
yeah, no, no. When we're talking about Krishna, or well, Krishna is an incarnation of Vishnu. When we're talking about Vishnu, ultimately from a Hindu perspective, Vishnu has no gender. Again, God with a capital G. So
Okay. Okay, sorry for that distraction. I was just trying to make sure I'm following. So,
no worries. No, no.
14.3. So, therefore, the phrase activity arises from Brahma is interpreted as activity being produced by the physical body, which is comprised of the modifications of Prakriti. The Brahman arises from the imperishable self. In this context, the term imperishable indicates the jiva, the individual self. The physical body, which is tenanted by the self and is nourished by food and drink, is designed for action. Hence, the physical body, which constitutes the instrument of activity, is said to arise from the imperishable. Therefore, the all pervading Brahman means in this context the bodies of all persons of diverse natures, which are the products of Prakrti, of which all material entities are comprised, and is hence all-pervading. The meaning is that the bodies owe their existence to this process of sacrifice. Okay, so
So
what is this saying,
Prakriti,
Sako?
yeah, so okay. So there's a couple parts that I'm still trying to get clear on here as well. Uh, but Prakriti is a bit hard to translate, but it essentially means something like matter,
Okay.
like the material world. Um,
So it's kind of saying the material world is sustained through sacrifice?
I think we can read over it a couple more times just to make sure we're getting it because we don't want to because if it's something important we don't want to like
Of course, of course. We
yeah.
don't want to. Okay, so know that activity springs from Brahman, and Brahman arises from the imperishable self. Therefore, the all-pervading Brahman is ever established in sacrifice.
Okay, yeah, so that's what yeah, see that right there, that is sort of my my little confusion here because in Upanishadic thought, in Vedantic thought, Brahman is the supreme self. Like,
Hmm.
so, okay, maybe we'll get back to that one
So,
at
like,
some.
how can the Supreme Self be requiring sacrifice?
Yeah, exactly. That's I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to do a little bit of research into that part. Maybe we'll revisit it in the beginning of the next episode.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the commentary doesn't really seem to clear it up to me. It doesn't, the
Much, yeah,
commentary doesn't really seem to be explain. The commentary explains the phrase activity arises from Brahman, but I don't see anything in the commentary that's explaining what that second part means.
yeah,
Um, okay. Verse
yeah,
6. So I'm gonna make a note though here that
yeah. So I can
Sako
look it up
look into chapter
and
3
and then just like
verse
write down chapter and verse
15.
so
Yeah, chapter 3 verse 15.
that.
Okay. Oh, this reminds me, you saying chapter and verse reminded me. I mentioned before, now I've mentioned twice about American politicians who are of Indian descent
Mhm.
using the Bhagavad Gita. But what I keep forgetting to mention is that there was actually a Christian figure um, whose name I remembered when I started this sentence, but just forgot. But he converted to Christianity from Hinduism, and when he was a Hindu, before he converted, he he had memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita. Um, so I just think things
Wow.
like that are interesting, like I guess I'm saying that so that people maybe I'm saying that partially for our Hindu
Mhm.
audience, but also for our Christian audience. Like this is a person who really loved the Bhagavad Gita who became a Christian. So in us exploring these things, we're not trying to be syncretists or whatever, but you can truly appreciate the beauty of something and truly appreciate that which is good in something and
Oh
allow
yeah,
it to lead you closer to Christ.
right. And as long as there's no syncretism of beliefs, like a Hindu who becomes a Christian can still love and appreciate the literature of his ancestors. I mean,
Right.
Saint
Absolutely.
Basil. Saint Basil was an avid reader of Greek philosophy and mythology and literature, and he
Right,
actually advised like students to read the pagan stuff first as a primer for Christianity, like
right,
the primer for the Bible,
which is
so
super
that they would,
based.
yeah, like that way they would sort of understand the context of what the Bible is responding to.
Right, exactly. So we're kind of doing the same thing here. We're using St. Basil's method. And I feel like, I guess I feel like I need to say that because I foresee that even some people on our side might be like, hey, why are you guys going through this, like, quote unquote pagan text? Well, like, first of all, because it matters to these people and it's worth going through. But second of all, because it's just this is their Aristotle, this is their Plato, this is like the pinnacle of Hindu philosophy. And so if we're
Yeah.
going to talk to and engage with um the best of Indian thought, then this is the place to go. Okay.
Yeah, we're using the same Basel method. I would also say we're using the Saint Nikolai of Japan method.
Yes, absolutely. Who, by the way, is just, such a badass. I love that dude so much. Saint
Yeah,
Nikolai of Japan is just, he's one of my heroes. Definitely.
yeah. When he went to Japan, he spent like the first before he even began evangelizing in earnest. He spent the first 10 years learning the Japanese language and like learning about Buddhism and
Right.
Shintoism stuff. So then when he, preached the gospel, A, he understood what he was refuting, and B,
Exactly.
yeah. And B, he was able to preach the gospel in a vocabulary that the Japanese people would understand.
Exactly. I mean, if you stop and think about it, like, it makes sense because, one thing that okay, I know I know I rag on Protestants a lot, but one thing that really bugs me about Protestant sort of even Protestant missions, it's like I love you guys and I think that you guys have good intentions as missionaries, and I know that we kind of rag on you, but here's part of the reason we rag on you because you guys don't want to do the work. You guys don't want to do what St. Nicholas of Japan was doing. You just want to show up in a place and be like, you guys should all be Christians, and expect these people who have no context for that to just like become Christians for some
Yeah,
reason.
and
Um,
yeah, and in the case of India, they usually have like a very elementary level. So they'll go to like a village and they'll start talking to some Indian villagers, and they'll be like, oh, you worship these gods, uh, and then they'll sometimes ask like really really like jarring questions
right,
that unless somebody gets the context of why Christianity is what it is, there it's a jarring question. So they'll say like, but like, did any of your gods die for you?
right,
Like for somebody who doesn't get the biblical context, it's like, what? No, no. Why would
right,
my God die? like, it's like,
right,
or they'll say like, they'll sort of ask this like similar question. Here's what I think they do. They sort of read uh literature. Okay, they read the Old Testament polemics against idols and stuff like that. Um, or St. Paul's speech at the Areopagus, and then they
right,
sort of try to reenact that with all the pagans they go to evangelize in this sort of like shoehorning, like no nuance kind of way. You know what I mean?
right.
They're essentially just trying to reenact like like the Areopagus everywhere they go. But it's like everywhere they go is not the Areopagus, and not
Exactly.
everybody. Even though we talk about like certain universals shared between human traditions around the world, um, that the Bible comments on, like the underworld, like the divine council, and all that,
Right.
there are also differences, and when missionaries don't do their due diligence and understand what those differences are for that particular culture, you
Right.
just end up kind of looking like a moron.
Right. Well, also, like it bears pointing out that because you're right, we were just talking about how similar a lot of these things are, but those similarities go back thousands of years, whereas the differences exist today. Like, you have to be able to deal with the situation of, like, what is the situation on the ground, not just, I don't know, bark at people with stuff that isn't going to have any meaning to them. Because some guy who has never really studied like the Rig Vedas or and whatnot. Maybe he's a faithful Hindu, but he's never like done a deep dive into his own, you know,
Yeah,
mythology. He's not going to understand why you're saying like he's not going to understand necessarily the arguments, some of the higher level arguments that we might be trying to make, but I'm not going to approach that guy with like, here's a scholastic take on your thing. Doesn't that convince you? No, I'm
right.
going to approach that guy with something more like, I think it's beautiful that you have this faith in this religion, but let's talk about why I believe this is fulfilled in Christ or something like that. Like I'm gonna
Exactly.
break it down in a way that's gonna actually make sense to the person in front of me, not just stand up in a marketplace and be like, everybody is the
Right.
same and needs to anyway, um so one reason I bring that up is just I know we've said it before many times, but like if you're a Hindu and you're watching our show right now and you've encountered or listening to our show and you've encountered some Protestant missionary who put forth zero effort to try to understand your religion and just sort of like bashed you and then you're like, well, Christianity is dumb. It's not Christianity that's dumb. It's not even necessarily that guy that's
Yeah.
dumb. It's just his method is dumb.
Right.
So,
Well, yeah, or even not like, or let's say like not even bashed your religion or whatever, but like just had a very low level sort of cringe understanding of what you actually believed.
right,
It went off the like it's bad when somebody says like, why do your gods have multiple arms? Isn't that weird?
right,
Like a quick Google search will tell you that the multiple arms represent the functions of that god or goddess.
right,
So like, you'll have it like they'll be holding a sword in one arm, but then a fan in the other arm or something, and that'll represent like the sword represents the warrior wrath part, but the fan represents serenity, things like that. Like
right,
it's meant to represent the functions of what that god or goddess represents.
right. And and this goes back to like in a private conversation Sako and I were having, we talked about the fact that like um just to be perfectly honest, like when I look at Hindu art, like I personally, I have like a pretty visceral reaction to some of the stuff in these images, and I'm like, and Sako rightly pointed out that, like, yeah, but that's not an apologetic because just because, you know, just because an aesthetic is something that maybe I find really disturbing doesn't automatically mean that this is wrong or that this is, that this is untrue. It just means I don't like that aesthetic. But that doesn't inherently mean anything necessary. Like that's not in and of itself an
Right.
argument. And I
Yeah.
completely agree in principle. Um,
So
but it
right.
it does give
and
me that reaction, but like I'm not going to use that as an argument. I'm not going to
right.
go to India and hold up like the worst image I could find on a Google search and be like,
It's
"Look, this is what you worship. Stop worshiping this." Like that'd be dumb.
yeah, because and because you know, like atheists and other non-Christians look at some of the imagery used for the Lord in the Bible, about him as a warrior and how he drenches his sword in the blood of the wicked and all that, and they find that horrifying.
Right,
So what we need to do is sort of in order to have a proper apologetic, we need to sort of get past the ick factor and like point out on a systematic basis. Okay, so you have Kali who represents divine wrath, and you have the imagery associated with Yahweh and divine wrath. What makes Yahweh different, and
right,
why does Yahweh represent a more true and sort of just embodiment of divine wrath than Kali? That's how
right.
you do it.
Exactly. And I would also say too that like to some extent, like you said, you have to get past the ick factor and you also have to just like acknowledge that just because I think it sort of starts with a little bit of humility to be able to say like just because I don't like something doesn't automatically mean that it's not true. I still have the obligation, like I might be totally grossed out by some imagery from some religion, but I have the obligation to actually refute it, not just say, I don't like that. That's gross. Like that's not an argument. That's just you
Right.
making like an ick.
Right.
Um,
And back when I was a Hindu, it sort of took Kali and the Kali imagery to sort of make me, little by little, make me okay with the idea of divine wrath and punishment.
right,
That then sort of primed me to like return to that in the Bible and be okay with it.
right,
So in my case, it worked backwards. Through the whole Kali stuff, I got as a Hindu, I got reacquainted and accustomed, settled into the idea of
right.
divine wrath. That God is love, but God also upholds the cosmic order, upholds justice, and punishes the wicked
That's right.
uh, for the uh, for the sake of maintaining His creation and for the sake of like making sure that sort of those I explained it like this both the beloved and the condemned are experiencing God's love. The beloved experience his love towards them. The condemned experience his love towards those they hurt.
Right, exactly. No,
So
you're
I
exactly right.
yeah, so in my sort of spiritual journey, you could say I sort of needed to see that through Kali to then sort of reconcile with the Bible.
Right, exactly. Um, okay, verse 16. One who does not follow this cycle, thus set in motion, lives in error, reveling in the senses, he lives in vain, O Arjuna. Um, I mean, I feel like I understand this verse, even without the commentary, but I'm going to read the commentary anyway. So,
Mhm.
the commentary says, thus, this cycle is set in motion by the Supreme Being. From food originating embodied by the jivas, which are denoted by the word beings. From rain, food is produced. From sacrifice comes the rain. Sacrifice is achieved by activities which are accomplished by an agent, and activity arises from the embodied self. And again, the body is empowered with life from food. In this manner, there is a sequence which revolves like the wheel through the mutual relation of cause and effect. Hence, if one, so I feel like maybe that's what verse 15 was getting at, by the way, is like the imperishable self, when it's embodied, is nourished by the food.
Oh, that
Maybe
makes
that's what
sense.
that's getting at.
Yeah, I think you might be onto something there.
Um, Hence, if one who is engaged in spiritual practice, whether qualified for karma yoga or jnana yoga, does not keep in motion this wheel which revolves in a cycle through mutual relation of cause and effect, that person, by not maintaining his physical being by means of the remnants of sacrifice, lives in error. This sense become the the senses become the pleasure gardens of one whose mind and body are not nourished by the remnants of sacrifices. Rajas and tamas begin to preponderate, being thus deflected from self-realization, he rejoins only in sense gratification. Therefore, even if he were to strive for self-realization, it would be fruitless. So therefore his life is wasted. O Arjuna. Sri Krishna now says that the performance of the five great sacrifices, according to social status and stage of life, should only be renounced by one who is liberated, whose vision of the Atman does not depend on external means. So it sounds to me like um I think that like as just as a Christian looking at this, maybe the best thing I can say is that, um, from my perspective as a Christian, the idea of like needing to sacrifice and then you eat the rest of the sacrifice so that you're not ruled by the passions, um, for us, we would see it differently. In our mindset, it's more like we use the cycle of fasting and feasting to be liberated from this kind of obsession with food. So, like, instead of me being obsessed with food and wanting to eat a lot and these things, the church says no, fast for half the year. And then when you fast for half the year, what that does, and feast, so you have feast days and you have fast days, but what that does is it creates a system in which food and sort of my bodily pleasures aren't the central focus of my life anymore.
Yeah,
So
there's sort of like um cordoned off to and regulated.
exactly. Exactly. Cordoned off, and that's a really good way of putting it. Um, so instead of this kind of like ritualistic thing that's kind of ex opere operato, to use a Catholic phrase, instead of that, we believe in a much more sort of conscious and holistic kind of means of acquiring self-discipline and overcoming the passions, not by not so much by making a sacrifice and then eating the leftovers, but rather by reorienting our life and our mindset around Christ, and around who he is, around his love for us, and around his church. So through participation in the church and all that that entails, like we might complain about some guy who's a jerk who misrepresents Christ, but at the same time, on the other hand, part of how we reorient ourselves and part of how we overcome the passions is actually by learning how to go to church with that jerk and love him and see him as God sees him, with love, and not roll our eyes every time he says something stupid. Um this is this is how we gain self-discipline, not through this kind of cycle of
Right.
sacrifice.
And that's another thing that I would sort of challenge there as well, is like uh I'm kind of I'm kind of sort of simultaneously working on how to articulate this question and already anticipating the response. But we'll get to that response. But yeah, so earlier I mentioned that in our understanding, we sort of, in the same way that like a Hindu might look at some of the things that we Christians believe and think, okay, that's strange. For me as a Christian, looking at the Hindu cosmology, we see the idea that the gods need to be nourished as strange. But another
Right,
thing that we would sort of see as strange is why the formulaic nature. Like you have to pronounce the Vedic chants in Sanskrit with this particular pronunciation. Make sure you get as much of the sounds and intonations right as possible. Uh, there's a specific melodic structure and all that.
right,
You sort of have to do all these things right in order for the sacrifice to work. But why?
right,
Why? Why is it? Why does that make sense? Like and do the gods, do the devas not just like they're not able to receive the food unless the formula is done exactly according to like the ritual standards, or do they receive the food regardless? It's little things like that.
right.
What I'm sort of anticipating is, here I'm actually kind of anticipating both Hindus and Protestants clapping back with, well, what's with you and your liturgical formulas? Why don't you have like spontaneous worship? So, but I'll let
Well,
you tackle that one.
yeah, sure. I was actually I was actually anticipating the same question while you were articulating it, and what I would say to that is that um th- that question would make sense if we were Vatican I Catholics who believed that the liturgy had to be in a specific language and has to have, like St. Augustine's formula is form and intention, and correct form and intention is his formula. So if you have the correct form and intention, but this creates all kinds of problems because, in a lot of Roman Catholic circles, you do get this kind of bizarre legalism where it's like, if the priest coughs while offering up this, then is the liturgy invalidated because the liturgical book doesn't say priest cough at this time. So therefore,
Yeah.
so like you do get these bizarre legalisms. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that critique, yeah, you can turn that back on us if we have that mentality. But the Orthodox Church has never actually had that mentality. In fact, um, well, we do have the Divine Liturgy to put parameters around worship in some sense and to reflect the worship of heaven, because that's what the Divine Liturgy really does, is it reflects the worship of heaven. um, we also do have this sense in which there's not like a holy language that you have to have. No, the liturgy is offered in the language of the people. It always has been.
Right.
There isn't some sort of like perfect form that has to be carried out. You know, if the
Oh
priest
yeah.
has a slip of the tongue or if he coughs or something, it's not invalid. So the point is that,
Oh yeah.
at
And
yeah, go ahead.
we have a between uh Eastern Orthodox churches and Oriental Orthodox churches, we have a lot of liturgical diversity.
Right, we
So
do.
so all the basic form is there, i.e., blessing the bread,
Right.
by holding it up and breaking it, and group confession and sermon after the procession, the gospel book, and things like that. There are certain things that we sort of pass down over generations, but how you then do it, it is very sort of adaptable uh, to your cultural context. So,
Exactly.
like on one hand, you'll have like a very sort of quiet, reverent, like Russian Orthodox liturgy on one hand, and then you'll have an Ethiopian liturgy where at sort of the height of the liturgy, during the chanting of some of the hymns, you'll have like women doing the you know
Right.
and both of those are valid.
Yeah. Or
um
like I recently visited a Greek church, and it was fascinating to me how on the one hand I legitimately felt at home. Like the liturgy was the same. But on the
yeah.
other hand, there were actually a lot of differences. There was one point in the Greek liturgy where people started clapping, and in the Russian church, we do not clap. Russians don't clap, and Americans who have become Russian through baptism don't clap. It's not a thing. So I was actually startled. Like, these Greek people just start like, and I'm like, whoa, what happened?
What's
Like,
what was the clapping for?
what's that?
What was the clapping for?
It was part of Holy Saturday. So
Okay.
they were clapping at the point where the priest was throwing the bay leaves, um and they started clapping. In the Russian church, we don't do that. We might chant different things, and we might chant very excitedly, but clapping does not happen. No. We do, however, get really into bells in the Russian church. So when we do processions and
Nice.
stuff, we've got bells going. And I'm one of the few adults who always makes sure he gets bells. So I'm running around with bells with the kids. So
Yeah.
that part we do, but clapping isn't really something we do in the Russian church.
Yeah,
And then
exactly. Oh,
there's also other little things like in the Russian church after we receive. I don't know if you guys do this in the Armenian church, but in the
mhm.
Russian church when you receive the Eucharist, um you get it on the end of a spoon, and then they hold up the chalice and you kiss the chalice before you walk away. I found out by experience that the Greek church does not do that. So after I received, the priest gave me the Eucharist, and I received the Eucharist, and then I leaned in to kiss the chalice, and the priest leaned back to get away from me because he had no idea what I was doing.
Oh.
Um, and then I walked away, slightly embarrassed. But
Yeah.
the point is that we have all of these small differences over time, but it's the same liturgy. There's no, like, I could tell that I was in the same liturgy. I was having the same experience, and
Right.
yet there's beautifully different sort of cultural ways that this manifests itself, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Uh,
So that's
In the Armenian church, we don't even have uh, we don't even have spoons. Like,
no, I'm just
I
kidding.
know. the the priest the priest dips the bread in the wine and like
Oh,
puts it
okay.
in your mouth. Like the priest,
Oh,
yeah. So like you walk up and you walk up, you cross yourself, and you well, it depends. Sometimes people cross themselves before, sometimes they'll cross themselves after. But you walk up, bow your head in reverence
yeah.
before the Eucharist, and then the priest will say, the body and blood of the Lord, and put it in your mouth, like with his hand.
Yeah.
like tongue. And he will have already dipped it in the wine, so the bread and the wine are together.
Right. That's what we do with the spoon. We use a spoon. It's
Oh,
so
okay.
interesting that you guys don't have a spoon, but you do the intinction because when I used to be Anglican,
Mhm.
that was actually how they would do it in the Anglican church is you could do so you could either receive them separately in the Anglican church, just like how Catholics and Protestants do,
Mhm.
or if you went like this to let the priest know, then they would wait for the chalice to come and then the priest would dip it and give it to you just like how they do in the Armenian church. So that is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, over time we did get a few Latinisms in our liturgy, for sure. Um,
Uh-oh.
but
Uh-oh. I didn't
uh,
mean to I did not mean to diss on you. I just thought that was
no, no, no
interesting.
worries, no worries. But yeah, it was partly due to the contact with the Crusaders during the Middle Ages and stuff. So it's been around for a while.
Just blame the
But
Turks.
yes.
Just blame the Turks. Always just
uh,
blame the Turks.
everything on the Turks, yeah.
That's
But
right.
but but yeah. So all of this to say, is like to our listeners, sorry, we went off on a huge like liturgical tangent, but all of this to say that the argument of hey, you guys have liturgical formulas too would only be valid if we were formulaic in the same way as the pagans. Like you have to say these exact words,
Right.
and you have to administer the Eucharist in this exact way, with no deviations, and it all has to
Right.
sort of, and then especially like it's all done in a sacred language, not the vernacular of the people and all that stuff. But we don't do that. Like we do have liturgy, just like all people. Like ritual is humans are ritualistic creatures,
That's right.
but we don't have the same sort of formulaic um, structure as Vedic rituals, where even like the tiniest, like Vedic Brahmins are trained to pronounce the Sanskrit words to the T. Like you can't even hold a syllable too much longer uh, than you're supposed to, because Sanskrit is such a precise language that you might say the wrong word if you hold that syllable for too long.
Right.
Um, and
And then that would
it,
suck because then the god doesn't know which word you were using and he gets confused.
yeah, or well, not necessarily the god doesn't get it or whatever, but like the sacrifice, like in terms of its like ritual power, doesn't have its same potency. Like it doesn't take, if you will.
Right. No, I was kind of making a joke because of that
Yeah.
concept of it not taking is like, why does it not take? Like, is
Right.
the
Yeah.
god
Like
confused by by you using the wrong word? Like,
yeah, and here, okay, here I'm going to sort of be a little bit charitable, uh because I'm going to sort of use the same critique to criticize certain things in Judaism, at least Judaism in the form that it is today.
nice.
Because
I love criticizing the Jews. Let's do it.
of, oh no, what did I say? um, but okay, so like the certain strains of Judaism, like those that sort of branched off, works like the Sefer Yetzirah and
Hmm.
the later Kabbalistic literature, really does get into some of the stuff, because in certain schools of Hinduism, uh, so Sanskrit is the holy language, and it's sort of seen as like a divine language, right?
Hmm.
And but in the Hindu traditions, this really, really gets to its sort of most advanced version in the tantric schools. So
Mm.
uh like in sort of my last years of being a Hindu, last couple of years of being a Hindu, I was a practitioner of Trika Shaivism, which is one of the tantric schools of Hinduism. Um, and so
And it's
one of
also
the things
really fun to say.
Trika.
Trick-or-shavism. Trick-or-shavism. Tricka.
Okay,
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 I'm sorry. I'm
okay.
sorry.
Let's not alienate the audience prematurely, my friend.
I'm so sorry.
but but
It is fun to say, but I'm so
it
sorry.
is, it is. But so there's this sort of reverence towards the Sanskrit alphabet and the letters and their forms and their um placement because the the Sanskrit letters are said to have like cosmic significance, and
Right.
it was believed that like the whole teaching of the tantric school is found just in the Sanskrit letters and all that, if you know where to look. And so you sort of see this in Jewish mysticism as it developed later, where the
Right.
Hebrew alphabet is like God created the universe using the Hebrew alphabet. God spoke Hebrew. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, um, and in the Hebrew alphabet, like the forms of the letters, like I've heard some people believe like the forms of the Hebrew letters are eternal, and I'm like, bro, it's a later development off of the Phoenician alphabet. Paleo
Right.
Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew did not look like this.
Right.
um, and the same thing is true with Sanskrit. Like it went through scriptural development. Like there's no such thing as uh like this like a divine mystical language.
Right.
God God speaks to humans in whatever language that people is using. Like
Right.
so so yeah, so all this to say, like, I will admit to our Hindu friends that you know, some of those who profess belief in the God of Abraham also get into that the same thing that we're criticizing,
Yeah, like
namely Jewish mystics.
exactly. Jewish mystics do eat among the Latins. There's people like the SSPX and FSSP and all of those types of folks who they essentially worship the Latin language and um you know they're obsessed with it and they think that the liturgy should only be in Latin, and those are the
Yeah,
types of people who if the priest coughs they're worried that the
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 blessing,
sacrament is
yeah,
invalid.
is there.
um I am only half joking. Like I have actually talked to people and it breaks my heart, but there was even a woman who came to the bookstore that I used to work at and she asked me if God would be able to ever forgive her. And I was like, for this grievous sin she committed. And I was like, well, what is the grievous sin? First, I'm like, God can forgive anything. So, like, but then I'm like, what even is this grievous sin? And I mean, it truly breaks my heart, but her big grievous sin was that she was supposed to be praying this one Catholic prayer called the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, and she realized that she had been using the wrong word. And could God ever forgive her for this blasphemy of using the wrong word when she prayed? And I'm like, God doesn't care, lady. Like, don't don't do that. But so, like, yes, Jews definitely fall into this. There's even people who name the name of Christ who unfortunately do this, but it's not. it's not consistent with Holy Orthodoxy, and it's not consistent with um, it's not really consistent with what Christianity is to have this
Yeah,
mindset.
and right, and I think this is sort of like a good place to kind of explain our Christian sacramental worldview and why we feel like it sort of represents a healthy balance
Right,
between magical thinking on one hand and low church Protestant post Enlightenment desacramentalized thinking on the
right,
other. Um, so the sort of formulaic way of looking at things is essentially magical thinking. Like we have to say the thing in just the right way, just so in this rhythm or with these exact
right,
words or intonations. Otherwise, it won't take. So that's an extreme. Like why would God work that way? You know what I mean?
right,
Like if God's goal is to sort of draw all people to him, whether you're a Christian or a Hindu. This is sort of a basic universal. I think we can all contemplate together
right,
that if God seeks to draw all people to him, then why would he care that you held a syllable for too long?
right,
In your recitation. Um, on the other hand, God uses material means
right,
to communicate his grace. God sanctifies and blesses matter.
right,
It like God used God uses saints, and again, this is sort of like I'm talking to both our fellow Christians and our Hindu listeners here as well, because they have like saintly being, people like Ramakrishna and other like
Ramanuja.
sort of yeah, Ramanuja himself. Although Ramakrishna, I used Ramakrishna because he's very recent, like late 19th, early 20th
Oh,
century.
okay.
Yeah, so more contemporary. But like these saintly beings who had all these miracles associated with them that they did. And so whether you're Hindu or Christian, we do sort of share this common belief that the divine is able to use humans as a channel for his grace, for
Right,
his power. So if he can use a human being, a living human being, like uh if a human sort of lays his hands on a blind person and miraculously restores their sight, but it's really God restoring their sight through the vehicle of that saint putting his hands on that blind man's
right,
face, right? Then why couldn't God do the same thing using material vehicles like anointing oil or bread and wine?
right,
And so
absolutely.
that's the difference between sacramental thinking and magical thinking, because sacramental thinking is the acceptance that supernatural grace and miraculous power is communicated through mundane material objects.
That's right.
They are transfigured and transformed such that they become these supernatural objects, you could say, by the grace of the divine. But it's all on God's initiative. So you don't have to worry about like you missed a word or you missed a
Right,
phrase here or something. It's the thought that counts. All that matters is that God, you know, from a Christian perspective, God commanded us to do these things, so we do them. But
right,
he never said like, oh, and you have to recite it just so. Otherwise, I'm not going to send my grace down to you. Like
right. Exactly. Exactly. No, that's a really good point. And that's probably a good place for us to end
yeah.
our show today. I know you've got to get back to bed.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you watching or listening at home and you maybe don't know this, I just want to thank Sako again, truly, because Sako is now living in Armenia, like I said. But the thing is that our between him and us, there's like almost a 12-hour difference. So basically, he's living tomorrow. But like
It's
almost tomorrow.
4:37 in the morning.
Yeah, so for him it's 4:37 in the morning. For me it's 5:37 in the evening. So I just want to, thank Sako again because I really appreciate that he's here, that he's doing this with me, and that we're able to bring these things to you, but that he's doing this he's really making a sacrifice of his time and doing this for you and doing this out of love for you. So I want to thank him again. So God bless you
And
guys, and please do share this with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed. God bless.